This episode is brought to you in part by Samply. Samply makes the process of dealing with mix revision notes super easy. Make sure to check them out online at samply.app. And while you're there, get 3 months off any plan free by simply using the coupon code MYM at checkout. Hey, welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast. My name is Mike Indovina, and thanks for hanging out with me today. Today, my guest is Nick Radovanovic, or Nick Rad, as most people know him. And if you're not familiar with Nick, Nick is a mixing engineer who has worked with a ton of different artists in a variety of different genres. He's worked with everyone from Hilary Duff, Skillet, Stone Sour, Lights, Anberlin, and a whole bunch more. Now, in today's episode, we talk a lot about Nick's career trajectory and how he started as a musician who had quite a bit of success actually back in the day, and how that led to him ultimately getting into production and all of the things that happened along the way. And I think that his story is something that a lot of people can relate to, of the ups and downs of being an artist and working with others in a band and dealing with labels and all sorts of other stuff. There's a lot to his story that I think a lot of people can relate to. And even if you're not at that level that he was at, where he had labels and all that kind of stuff going on, even if you're just like a local small artist, maybe you're not even performing much, I think that there's still a lot of great lessons that Nick shares here that you can relate to your own career. So we definitely get into all of that stuff. And then we start to transition into, when he did get into production, how he started to think about running his studio, running his business, and the efficiencies that he wanted to create. And a lot of that had to do with his experiences as a musician and being in the studio working with other producers. So we talk about him working with some legend producers like Bill Stevenson, Stephen Egerton, Howard Benson, Aaron Sprinkle, and a whole bunch more. And so we get into Nick's experiences working with those producers, some of the lessons that he learned with those people, and some of the processes that they had, and how he's implemented that into his own process, into his own studio, and how he uses that to create efficiencies so he can work faster, get stuff done more creatively and more focused, and just ultimately turn around better results in less time. So yeah, we get into so much good stuff in this episode. I think you're going to really enjoy this one. So that's it. Let's jump into it. Nick Rad, thank you so much for being on the MasterYourMix podcast. What's going on, dude?
Thanks for having me. This is going to be fun. I'm excited.
Me too. For people who might not be familiar with you and your background, you know, who you are, what you do, how you got into music and music production, can you give us that background?
Yes. Well, it goes back to when I was 8 years old and I started playing guitar. Took lessons for like 2 years, and I never put the guitar down. I was just playing it every single day at 8, 9, 10. And that kind of morphed into the first band that I got into was in seventh grade basically, and it was a band called Hangnail, and we were three guys at the time just doing pop punk. MXPX was a big influence for us, and Lagwagon, NoFX, all those kind of bands, and that was 7th grade, 8th grade, and it turned into, we were a band for how many years? So I think we were a band for like 10 years in total, somewhere in there. So that grew. We got another guitar player in high school. So we were a 4-piece. Out of high school, we signed to Tooth and Nail Records. And we did our first record in Kenosha, where we are from, Kenosha, Wisconsin. We did our first record. We self-produced it, and we had no idea what we were doing. We were 18, 19 years old, making some punk rock music. And it turned out that was good enough to be, at the time, when Tooth and Nail heard it, they're like, oh yeah, let's just put this out. It'll be great. We don't got to spend money on a record. Let's do this. You guys already paid for it. Great. So they gave us some money for it. It was fine. But that was like our dream. Our dream was just to be on a label and just go on tour. We didn't know anything else. That's 18 years old. No one cares, right? We're just going to go. So we did that. We put out 2 more records after that. So we did 3 records on Tooth and Nail. And the second 2, we worked with Bill Stevenson and Stephen Egerton at the Blasting Room in Fort Collins, Colorado. So that was kind of like my intro to, I could probably do some of this in the future when this band is done, because those guys were impressive to work with. Just their work ethic was incredible. which is where I get that from. I mean, I got that for sure from those guys. So yeah, then in 2003, that's the Hangnail phase ended. And I was 23 or something at the time. I don't know how long. Yeah, something like that. And this band Acceptance that we played shows with on the West Coast when I was in Hangnail, they needed a drummer. And they knew me, like, hey, I think Nick can play drums, even though I was a guitar player at the time. They called me up and said, hey, we got a record deal with Columbia. Do you want to come out here and be our drummer? And I was like, sweet. Let me get on the plane real quick. I'll be right there. And I mean, I don't know. At the time, I don't understand how even my parents were like, yeah, cool. Like that, they were all supportive at the time. In fact, all of our parents throughout all of this was supportive. And now me being a parent, it's like, wow, that was impressive to let our kids do that kind of. So that was crazy. So I flew out to Seattle and I joined those guys in 2003. And we did there was an EP we put out, and then we did a full length called Phantoms that was out on 2005. It came out, I believe. And yeah, I just had to I could play drums. I just had to get good really fast is the thing. Like I dabbled back in the Hangnail days. I would play, but I just had to get good. So I just kind of went hard and just okay, we got to be pro here. We got to. So I just picked it up, and I'm a very simple drummer, so I don't do crazy fancy stuff, but I'm a pocket guy, so I'll just be locked in. So yeah, so that was fun. That was a good ride. I mean, during those Acceptance years, it was we'd go from a tour with Fall Out Boy to Yellow Card to Panic at the Disco, Cartel, The Academy it was all over the map, all kinds of bands, and it was a great 3-4 years there of a run. And so, yeah, all of that was a huge learning process for me, as far as experience goes and making records with pro guys. Aaron Sprinkle did Phantoms. I'm not sure if you know. I'm sure you know Aaron Sprinkle, right? Or yeah.
Yep.
So all the that stuff, I was just kind of picking up small things here and there as I was doing this, And so when all the band stuff was done, and I was like, okay, I gotta make money. What am I gonna do, for my job? I just dove right into producing, learning Pro Tools. This was 2006 now, or seven, somewhere in there. Yeah. And I just learned stuff. And, luckily I was living at home for free, so I didn't have a whole lot of expenses. And, so that's kind of how I got into the whole production mixing part of my life. Now there's a lot more that goes into it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because you kind of mentioned that when you were in Hangnail, you got to work with Bill and Stefan at the blasting room. And you said that at that point you kind of started to realize production could be a thing for when the band was done. So was the writing on the wall there? Were you kind of already thinking ahead, this band thing is not going to last forever? I do need to consider my options, or because a lot of people, it's when you're signed to a label, especially that young, you're this is my life, I'm set, But
yes, I gotta be honest. No, I didn't. We were just so caught up in it all and just having fun that I just didn't think about the future. I just thought about, this is what we're doing now. I know we have a tour set up, in 2 months. I know this is going to happen in next year, whatever it was. And so no. And so that's probably, yeah. So I was living by the seat of my pants, just, here we go. This is going to work, and not thinking it wasn't going to work, really. I just wasn't thinking that. And that was just being completely naive at the time, So yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah. So then, but you had sounded like you at least were kind of you were considering productions at that point. Yeah.
Yes. I there was a thought that was okay. I was I could do this, after, whenever if I want to, if I had time, I can hit record, I can play, I can figure out how to, get things on time and edit things and do all that. So the thing with those guys, with Bill and Stefan and Jason Livermore out there, the one big thing that I took from those guys, and they weren't really grid editors. They were just kind of more feel, because they were more old school feel editors. But the way they edited stuff by ear and sliding things around, I was just watching Jason do that for days and just realizing, oh, this software is incredible, that we can do this and make it feel a certain way and tighter and there's no flams and all, all that kind of stuff. So like that was an eye-opening thing for me, which really got me into the whole thing. Like when we did a song, here's a good story for you. We did a song with Acceptance with Howard Benson, and it was supposed to go on Phantoms. It was actually a re-record. So we did it with Aaron Sprinkle, and it was great. Everyone loved it, except for the label. The label said, "Hey, this song's awesome. Let's redo it with Howard Benson. Let's spend $35,000. It's going to be awesome." And so that's what we did. We flew down, did one song, and I forget who. I think JJP mixed it, I believe, and no one liked it in our team. I mean, there's probably some bias stuff happening there, but we didn't use it. So, but with that process, that was a cool process because this was after Bill and Steph and the Blast Room, so it was kind of like the wheels were turning. But when we did that song with those guys, there was a guy in a closet. Like no one ever saw this guy. He was just editing everything as we were cutting it, and that to me was it was at the time it was like, oh man, this is so cool that I just cut drums. They were back on, in the room an hour later. They were perfect. And I love that whole thing. And that's kind of what I brought into when I started doing the stuff like, later on in life. I was like, my guy, Steven, who's with me today, he is that guy who just, he'll be in his house, just editing things as we go. And I thought that was the coolest thing to me is how fast they could turn around these things,
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, it is such a fascinating thing, like, as a musician going to the studio. I feel like every time you go to the studio, you learn something new. And, for like most bands, when they're coming to the studio for the first time, it's like, maybe they're learning a lot about their musicianship. And they start to see people editing their tracks, and they're like, oh shit, I got to get like tighter. I got to be a better musician. I'm going to start practicing to a click track or something like that. And then you get the guy who's like the techie kind of guy, maybe who's like, oh, I love this, like this technology. I can get into it. Like this could be a cool, fascinating. So it's really interesting. Like I think the studio is just it reveals a lot about like who you are as a person and like kind of what you enjoy, and it pushes people to learn new things, which is really cool. And I love that. I imagine too that going through that experience of working on the same song with like a bunch of different people, different producers, and seeing it done both ways, like that must have been a really fascinating experience in itself to see like what makes this person sound a certain way versus this person's. Looking back at that experience, like, was there anything that stood out between the different producers and what made one sound more a certain way than the other?
I gotta say, like, I wasn't super during the Howard Benson thing. I wasn't super. I was kind of in and out of that whole session. It was kind of a weird time. We did it in 2 days, and it was a very weird thing. We never even saw like Howard. I saw him for like 3 minutes. He was, I don't know where he was. Upstairs, they have the whole his vocal room where he'll take our singer Jason and just go cut vocals, and we never see any of it. We don't hear any of it. So like it was an interesting way. I just go in there, cut some drums. And then I was around for some guitar stuff because there was also other things that we were doing. Or like we had to go do meetings too at that time. We were kind of in and out of the whole thing. But I just feel like Aaron's great, and so probably a lot of it was demoitis. Like we had the song and it was great, and we're like, why are we redoing this? Because the label wants it. So that I think I would probably say 85% was demoitis. But I don't know that Howard Benson process was just a little fabricated, like just kind of like, I don't know. It was hard to explain. I don't really, it was a weird time.
I've heard Krista Makes from Less Than Jake talk about working with Howard Benson, and he always describes it as like almost like an assembly line kind of process where like there's lots of people in the room, everyone's got their own task, and like you get stuff done quickly that way.
Yeah, the guitar guy there from Buck Cherry was just like the guitar tech. And it was like, here's this part. Okay, here's this guitar. Here's this pedal. Go. And like he would just get it for us. And that's how we. It was crazy,
That's funny. So then, having had those experiences in the studio and watching those people work, like, how do you think those experiences have shaped the productions that you do these days and your approach to that? Because now you've seen it from different sides. So I'm sure you learned a lot about like what you liked, what you didn't like, and maybe how you would approach your own productions there.
I mean, yeah, these days I'm not doing a whole lot of productions, more so mixing, but like I mean, I feel I was modeling when I was doing those whole, so back in 2007 when I started doing production mixing. Quick story real quick. I met Ben Cassica, who was the old guitar player for Skillet, because they're from Kenosha, they're from my hometown. So a year, 6 months after I started doing this full on on myself, I met Ben, and Ben was like, "Hey, I got a bunch of bands that want to make a record with me. I have no time. I'm on tour. Will you be the guy?" And that's kind of what started this whole like fireball of work. So that we built the space, and I was just he would bring in bands. I would bring in bands from like the just the Milwaukee, Chicago areas. People would drive. People would even fly in and do some records with us. It was like a 6-year run of like just back to back to back stuff. And so to go back to your question, so after a year of doing that, we got Steven. Steven's my editor guy, mix prep, Atmos guy. He's brilliant. He's in Racine. I'm in Milwaukee, so we're close by here. And Steven, we got him in to be an all-time editor, because I was like, listen, we need a guy that just fixes everything so we can make records fast, so we can go. And so again, going after the whole Howard Benson thing. Aaron Sprinkle did the same thing. He had a guy that was also doing a lot of the editing too. But I think the Howard Benson thing kind of stuck it out to me more, just because like we never saw the guys editing. It was just some guy in a closet somewhere, So I wanted to do that. I wanted to be like, listen, we just need a guy that can just edit everything. I can keep cutting stuff as we go, and that's what we did. And Steven he got really good. I mean, he was an amateur kind of guy at first, but then we just trained him, and he got really good. So yeah, I just feel like having two guys. I mean, I know it's like a wishful thinking for some people out there doing this, but like having that other guy, if the work is there, is so crucial to make records and make them faster and kind of at least make some money doing what you love. Can't spend like weeks on one song. So yeah, I don't know. That was a big thing. Just and then just like the whole work ethic. That's huge. If you can work faster and better, you can make more money down the road. Can't burn yourself out. But like those guys at the blasting room were doing 14-hour days consistently for years and years, and they probably still are. Who knows? But maybe not anymore. But that was just a big thing for me. Like I definitely took that with me.
For sure. Well, I think just to talk about the like having help in the studio, you don't necessarily need to even have someone that's like hired full-time or whatever to work in your studio. Like, there are a lot of freelancers out there who will take on editing projects. And, I think it just comes down to when you're getting started, or when you're trying to like optimize your process so that you can maximize your money per hour and all that kind of stuff. It's like, you just need to know like, what are your strengths versus someone else's strengths, and like lean into that. And if it means, if you love editing, go for it, edit. If you're fast at it, go for it. But if you hate it, send it to someone who does enjoy it, who is fast at it, and who's going to do a better job than you will. And it's worth the money in that, to just be able to free up that time from your life and then focus on something else that's cooler,
100%. I love that. And what's side note real quick, editing, for everyone out there, editing is the most underpaid thing in music. I feel it's so underappreciated, and it drives me absolutely bonkers whenever I hear about what people want to pay for like a vocal edit, or like, I'm like, dude, this is what's going to make the song great. And it drives me nuts. Anyway.
It's true. I think that's a great point to bring up. It's like, so many people don't realize the impact that the editing can actually make, and most people I think a lot of people, when they're getting started, they don't necessarily get into like the grid editing style, and you don't even need to be, but it's just like, making sure that you have everything feeling tight and locked in, and that creates space between notes, which makes mixing easier, because now you've got space for your reverb tails and stuff like that to exist. Stuff like that is really important, and so it's certainly worth paying someone who's good at it and who can just get that job done right. And for myself, like I don't have an assistant, but I certainly have someone I go to for all my editing now. Yes. And it's just like, once I discovered him and like came back to me, I was like, I don't even edit this way. Like, this is amazing, like
it's so nice. And it's way less stressful for you too. Like, it's just, you don't got to think about it. You just go on to the next task. It's like, and I will contribute editing when we first started doing the whole thing with me and Ben and Steven, and when bands would come in who were, not amazing musicians by any means, but people who had songs, we would make them sound super pro. And I feel like that got us to a place where like that, they told their friends band and their friends band, and what it just snowballed. And it was like, because they weren't expecting to leave the place with it sounding like a pro record, but and that's what we would do. And so but again, that's all to me. That's like, I mean, mixing helps, but like the editing thing, like if it's all loosey goosey, it's not going to sound good to me. Like I'm a very pop guy, so I want things to be like kind of perfect, so I attribute editing to like a lot of our success for sure. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I've always said that like when it comes to production, it's like recording, editing, and mixing. Those are like the main 3 stages, but it's like each of those needs to be done to the best of its abilities before moving on to the next. Because if you start with crappy recordings, you're going to be working way harder in editing, and mixing is going to be a lot more of a challenge. Or if you have someone that's brutal at editing, it's going to like fuck up everything. It's not going to sound as tight. So it's just like everything needs to be done at a certain caliber before moving on to the next thing. So,
yes.
And editing is often the thing that people skimp out on. Every time I talk to people about it, it's like so many people just gloss over it, or they just do comping and that's it. And comping isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's important, but sometimes that extra little tightening goes a long way.
Even now, when I get songs, I'm mixing now full time. So like when I get songs from, pro guys, it's like, oh, they didn't really care about doing this vocal edit or whatever it was. Like it felt like some of it was just, on the fly. Oh, I got to get to the next gig. We got to do this. Like that's what it feels like sometimes. And I just wish some, people would take more TLC with their vocals sometimes. But yeah, but then there'll be times where like I do a song for an indie band or whatever, and it's like, oh, this guy was great. He took the time, and he's going to be a good producer, at some point,
Mm-hmm.
So like it goes both ways.
Hey, just want to take a quick second to tell you all about our awesome podcast sponsor, Samply, which is an app that I've been using for a while now that has made the process of mix revisions with clients so much easier. In the past, I used to get vague emails from clients about what sections needed fixing, and it was always a bit of a guessing game. But with Samply, I can upload my mixes, send my clients a link to a playlist where they can listen losslessly, and then they can add timestamped comments directly on the files. I can then import these notes into my DAW and have them perfectly synced up to my session. So there's no more guessing. Another feature that I love is their playlist embedding. Right now on my website, I have a lossless playlist of my portfolio so that any potential client can hear my work at full quality. No more crappy sounding, low resolution MP3 files. Instead, people can hear my work at its best. And the icing on the cake? Samply integrates with a ton of different services. And one of my favorite integrations is their integration with SoundFlow. With just one click, Samply can export my mix from my DAW, upload it to Samply, and then send my clients an email for where they can hear their song. One button, that's all it takes. It's a major time saver. So Samply has really streamlined my workflow, and I know that they can do it for you too. So make sure to check them out online at samply.app. And you can get 3 months off any Samply plan for free by simply applying the coupon code MYM at checkout. Well, to go back to like your days of that transition of you being a musician to a producer, like a lot of people I think get into this industry kind of like we were talking about earlier, where it's like you're young, you like have this vision in your mind, you're going to be like a rock star, and in your case you had lots of good things going. You had labels, you were touring and doing all these great things, and I think that a lot of people would just want to continue going down that road, whereas you chose to eventually get into production. So what was that transition like? Like what made you ultimately decide, okay, production is where I want to go with this, and I'm not going to join another band and focus on doing that?
Good question. I think the way acceptance ended and how it's kind of weird. Like we had just come off a tour with like I think it was the Academy and Yellow Card. Yeah, that was like our last tour, and it was like 3,000 whatever. Like it was a great tour for us to be on, and we got to the end of it, and there was stuff there was just kind of like it was a weird ending. Like there was like things going on in the band, like differences. Our new demos, the label wasn't loving or something, like management, all this weird stuff was happening. And in a short story, we just stopped. We're like, you know what? We're done. Let's just be done. And tensions were high. And it's like, and it was at the time, everyone was like, okay, yeah, Like it was weird. Like everyone's like, yeah, this is weird. This is not going well. Let's just be done. Hindsight, we probably shouldn't have done that. We should have done one more record easily and see what would have happened. So because of that ending, how that went down for me, uh, I didn't want to go into another band. It was, in fact, what happened was after Acceptance broke up, me and Christian, the guitar player, moved to LA to start another band. So we did, in fact, do another band for a brief time. We moved to LA into our manager's house. Me and Christian, we had bunk beds, and we were writing songs for this new band called Thunder Thunder. That was our name, right? And 5 months into that, Christian got a call from Anberlin and was like, "Hey, you want to play guitar for us?" And I was like, "Dang!" I was like, "Yep, you gotta do it, dude. Just go." So he joined Anberlin. I went back home, and that's when so there was a 5 month period there of like, well, okay, let's keep going, but it wasn't meant to be. So it was just an easy thing for me at the time. I was like, I don't want to join another band for sure. I don't want to start anything else new. That takes forever to get going, and unless Yellow Card called me or somebody, I wasn't going to start doing any kind of like, So it was an easy thing for me at the time. I was like, yep, I want to get into production. Let's go. That was it for me. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I can somewhat relate to that as well with my own story too. It's like I did the band thing forever, and things felt like they were moving pretty good, and then eventually like the band just kind of disbanded. Like someone moved away or had a kid or whatever, and that was kind of a thing that just kept happening with every band I was part of, and it was just so frustrating to me where I felt like I kind of realized like I can't rely on other people for my own career, because like as much as we're all on the same page right now, 5 years from now, who knows, right? And like that was kind of I don't know, that doesn't necessarily apply to everyone, but for me that was my experience, and that's kind of what made me realize like I do love the studio. I love being there. I love playing with the tools. Like I'm gonna dedicate all the band nights time, all the rehearsal time to just getting good at production, and that cool. Was kind of how I did it, right?
Yeah, that's great.
So it kind of sounds somewhat similar to what you're doing there. So then moving into like your production career now, like one thing that I find really interesting when I look at your discography of like who you've worked with, like you have a wide range of artists that you've worked with. You've done everything from Hilary Duff, Skillet, Lights, Stone Sour, Coheed Cambria, like all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of diversity in the genres of those artists. I'm just curious to ask a couple questions about that. And one being like, when it comes to your clientele, is that diversity something that you're purposeful about like getting? Like, do you purposely try to have a lot of diversity in the kind of projects that you work on, or was that kind of something that just happened naturally?
Yeah, that's funny. No, it's not on purpose. It was naturally because of my background and being a Christian and being in that world as well. There's a ton of that whole side that I do that I kind of like wasn't actually planning on doing a lot of Christian artists. It just kind of happened. It was a complete natural thing. I wasn't going out pushing for anything. It just like was word of mouth kind of thing. And then, of course, then you have the whole other side of like where I came from Acceptance and all that, and you have all those early 2000 people who not non-Christian stuff, like it was the same idea. It was like I would do a song for, trying to think of like who back in the day, not even a Lights. Let me think of Mr. Wives. Like I do a song for Mr. Wives. I would do like a test mix or something for them, and I would get it, and then they would just word of mouth. It was like there's been zero like marketing on my side. It's just more like just it just all happened organically, which I'm very blessed about. That's a thing that's like I still don't understand how. I'm passionate about what I do, so like I'm gonna do it to my best of my ability and see what happens. And it's like I put it out, and then word of mouth happens and all that. So yeah, I should probably do more more like going out and getting things for myself. I've been probably way too I don't know. I feel like I've just been very lucky, honestly, to get what I've gotten, and I feel like I put the work in obviously to it, but like it's been a lot of just organic stuff my whole career. And my whole career honestly has been just this. There's been none of this. It's all just been just grinding and going and doing the work and just slow and steady, like, wins the race. That's been my whole like thing, which I'm okay with. I'm okay with that. I don't want to like, well, I don't know. I think there's something about that's like, that works for me,
For sure. Well, it's funny because you said that you've done zero marketing, but I would actually argue the opposite, where it's like you spent all of that time in the bands, like networking and making those friends, and then making them aware of the fact that you could offer your production services, and that then that gives people the opportunity to give you a chance and try it out and see how it goes. And then from there, it just kind of snowballs. Because like you said, like you did a lot of Christian stuff because you were in that scene, and it kind of just it seems like it followed you because you were in that scene already,
Yeah.
and you made friends with people and you networked, and that goes a long way too, right?
That's so true. I mean, it's funny you said that, because I don't think I realized what the band days did for my career in mixing and production until like 5-6 years ago. I kid you not, because I felt like it was a bit of a waste of time, of like like, oh man, I just spent 7 years of my life, on tour and doing this band stuff. And then I realized, as I was about 4 or 5 years ago, I was getting to a point where like I was more like doing more label work, and people, A&R guys at the labels, were just huge fans of Acceptance. And it's like, I realized, there's been a lot of occurrences in the last 5 years of that whole thing. And it was like, it was shocking to me. I'm like, oh, okay. So that wasn't a waste of time then. That's where my, it's like, I realized. So I'm glad you said that, because you're right. That is like a real thing. Like being in a band, having some cred and doing that whole thing. It does help a lot. Especially now making records and learning what I did, making records with back in the day, and applying that to what I do now. And so yes, you're right. That was a big, I'm realizing more now in my old age. Okay, that was a real thing, Yeah.
Well, I think it also comes down to like just what you were doing during that stage in your life, right? Like if you're actually like making friends and you're like a social guy, that kind of thing, it's going to go a long way. Like I feel myself, like we talked before we started hitting record, like, yeah, I grew up with like the Sum 41 guys or Silver Scene. Like we played rec centers together, and like I had both of those bands open up for my band back in the day. But for me, I was so shy that I never talked to anyone. And so when my bands ended, I was kind of like, oh fuck, like I had all these cool bands that were like blowing up, and I ruined it by not being like just social, and like I kick myself all the time over that. But like, I think that there's a lesson to be learned there for anyone who's listening to this. Like if you're playing shows, like just put yourself out there, It's like there's so many people in this industry that are just cool people that are just friendly and they want to talk, and it's not that intimidating. Just do it, and then you're gonna find that it will just benefit you in so many ways in your life.
That is 100% true. And let me give you a good story real quick on that. We were doing one of the first like Fall Out Boy tours, and they wanted us to headline the West Coast, because we were from Seattle and they're from Chicago, and we're like, that's not a good idea, man. Let's you guys keep going. You guys headline. And they're like, no, you guys got to headline. So we did it, and it wasn't the right choice at all. Anyway, when we went through with Fall Out Boy, Patrick would come into our RV, and he would have a guitar, and he'd just be like writing stuff, right? And we all felt like, what's this guy doing? Like, why are you like, this is weird. Like, why are you in here? And no, like we were friends with those guys, but but it wasn't like a close, it was more like, we see him at the show and we wouldn't really, small talk. But yes, knowing what I know now, if I would have just spent more time talking to these people and just getting to know them better, who knows what would have happened at that point. So that's a very good point, Mike. I think that like be friends with people that don't, you never know what's going to happen in life, and like what is going to be thrown your way. But like if you have connections, it's going to help things for sure.
Absolutely. So then going back to what we were talking about with like the diversity that you have in your clientele, like one argument that I think a lot of people make for niching down is that you can kind of become known for a specific sound. And some people would argue that makes it easier to build your career and, your clientele because you're known for a specific thing. For you being in a position where you have so much diversity, do you agree with that? Like, do you think that it's been a advantageous thing or a disadvantage to you to have that diversity?
I think it's That's a good question. I've asked myself this many times. I don't think it's a disadvantage. I come from a rock background, so like that's like my thing. Going into the whole Christian market CCM thing, that was like it was a bit of a challenge at first, but then I kind of figured it out as I went. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's a disadvantage. I just think that like if you can do it and do it well, then great. But there's probably a point where you're like, okay, I can't really do metal very well, so I'm gonna stop doing that and do something else. Maybe that's a real thought. But I guess for me, it's like it's funny. I mean, yeah, I don't know. That's a good. I think it's an advantage. I thought like, man, what if I just put all my eggs in this pop rock or rock thing and don't do anything else? And I just think that I think it'd be, I mean, maybe just financially it'll be harder, because like, okay, I'm gonna be losing some stuff, but I'm gonna go hard in this down this one lane. So maybe that's my thought. It's like, you know what, I'm just gonna figure out how to do whatever comes my way, and I'm just gonna reference everything and just try to figure it out. That's kind of where I was at.
Yeah. I've seen it from both sides of the coin, and that's why I ask, because I think that like different people come at it from different angles, and there is something to be said for just like letting things come to you the way it's supposed to, and embracing that. And if you, but also in your career too, you talked about how like you got into the Christian stuff, and then that created more Christian stuff, and so it kind of does snowball that way, right? And then it branches out from there. So I think there's so many different approaches to it. It just really comes down to like what you ultimately feel is best for you, and what gives you the satisfaction when it comes to working on production. Some people like to have that diversity, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's smart, because if you hear a song and it inspires you in some way and you want to just take it, then great. There's plenty of songs that are right in my lane of pop rock that I get that are not very inspiring, and it's like, okay, well, I got to do something with this. So let's. So yeah, that's a good point. It's a good point. There's very few songs that I'm like just not into at all. And if sometimes I'll go back to the producer and be like, listen, maybe we got to fix it's things that maybe that they got to fix in the, before I mix it or something, or like this, it's not the right, whatever it might be. But sometimes I'll do that too, and go back and be like, listen, maybe this is not right for me, or maybe you got to fix some things. That kind of thing might happen.
For sure. So then to shift gears to your mixing side of things, because that's what you're doing a lot more of these days. I'd love to talk about your process a little bit more. Like when it comes to starting a mix, like what's your typical mindset going into it? Like how do you start? Where do you start? Do you have a specific workflow that you follow? What's that look like for you?
It's typically I'll just like put the rough on first, just listen to that bad boy. And then I'll just start like with like the biggest, like, a chorus 3 or a chorus 2, and just kind of like listen to what's going on. And I typically start with drums, because I'm just a drum junkie when it comes to samples and whatever. I'll get those drums where I kind of want them, and then I'll get everything else in there, guitars, bass. I'll get the music kind of going first before I get to the vocal land, which is probably, I'm not sure if that's, people hate that idea, but that's what I do. That works for me. So like I like to have the track, hitting nice, and then I kind of bring in the vocals and go from there. That's typically how I start a mix.
Nice. Well, it's interesting that you say that, because one of the things that I really like about your productions is the way you treat your vocals. And I feel like you do a great job of getting your vocals to just like sound clear and controlled, but also just to like sit in the mix really, really well. And so I was curious about your approach to getting vocals in the mix. Like obviously if you have the instrumentation done, how are you making sure that you have the room for a vocal to fit in well? And what's your approach there?
That's all in my head as I'm getting the track going. So I'm always thinking like, okay, when I have this freaking high synth that's like, tearing my face off, I'm going to be carving that out to make sure there's room for the vocal. I'm doing kind of all of that stuff even before I hear the vocal, which is kind of weird. But, and sometimes, the whole tracks, I'll do the track spacer thing and only, side chain that to the vocal. So there's room for making some room on those instruments. And so I don't know. I have a couple go-to vocal chains that are up and running, and I'll like literally play the first one. If it's not great, I'll pop it into the second one real quick and like, okay, that one's a little bit better. Let's roll with that one. I do that kind of thing sometimes. There's always like two vocal chains kind of sitting there. So that's that gets me going, and then I'll start just carving things at that point. The vocal the vocals like you know I want it to, I'm a bright kind of guy, so I like things to be bright and exciting. It's not always the case for the best thing for every mix, but that's kind of like where my brain goes to. Because if it's not exciting, no one's gonna like it, kind of thing. So yeah, that's kind of what I do. Like the vocal, then yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned having two different vocal chains there. Like how
Yeah.
what are the differences between the two? Like is there like a different approach to it, or is it just different tools?
One of them's a little bit more aggressive, and one of them's less aggressive. If that's like one of them has a CLA 76, the other one has just the UAD 76, so it's a little more transparent. But just with different other texture things going on, like I think my first one that's more aggressive has like a Saturn 2 on there, with some tape on the tape saturation going on. So it's just a little more like aggressive, I guess, and less aggressive is how I would explain it.
Gotcha. Yeah. Just like pushing different intensities into it, I guess.
Yeah. Because I mean, a lot of the whole like Christian market stuff too, like some of those verse one vocals are like out in the open. They have to be like they have to be transparent, and like it can't be crazy. So I'm always doing like multiple tracks of like verse pre-chorus or on different tracks, treated differently and all that kind of stuff happening.
Gotcha. As far as getting the control of the vocal, what's your typical approach there with compression? Like, are you the kind of guy that likes to hit vocals pretty hard with compression?
I do. I typically do. And so I always go hard. And then when I listen, back, if it needs to be pulled down, I'll do a mix thing or something like, just kind of like, yeah, but I'm always starting it kind of pretty hard. Yeah.
Yeah. And then what about the treatment of effects on vocals? Like I know a lot of people have different preferences that they like. Maybe some people like delay versus reverb or wet versus dry, that kind of thing. Like, do you find that you have a preference yourself?
I like it dry. I like things as dry as possible, unless the song doesn't call for that. But coming from like the whole like punk rock and rock, it's like okay, the vocals are dry pretty much in the in your face kind of thing. So that's what I go for. To me, it makes the mix cleaner. Like even with drums, it's like I don't want to use a ton of verb if I don't have to, because I want things to be clean. And so yeah, typically, yeah, I'll use verb and delays. It just depends on what the song is, and typically a verse one will be like always dry, then maybe verse two it comes in with some delay or something like that.
So you're like building the mixes up as they go along.
Yes. A lot of this. Well, I guess in both genres. Well, I mean, yeah, a lot of like the whole CCM stuff. There's always like there's a stripped down verse one that's just like vocal and piano, and like you kind of got to nail that whole thing. And then once the drums kick in, because it's just once the drums kick in, it's a whole different song. But the whole first verse is like it's treated differently.
It's kind of like a formula to that genre, I guess.
There kind of is a little bit. I don't want. Yeah, I mean,
maybe formula isn't the word that people like to hear, but yeah.
Yes.
There's a structure, a common structure, I suppose.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, so yeah. And I mean, it's, when I, being able to have Steven do the mix preps for me, is when that started happening, like that, 3-4 years ago, that was like, it was a game changer for me, because I would open the song up and just be able to be creative and not think about anything else. So, he really sets it up nicely, like for me to go in and just like, do my thing and be creative and not worry about any of the junk that happens. That, when he gets it and he puts it all together and it's like, oh, and he's making all the calls to the producers about like, hey, this is happening. There's a click here. There's a pop there. We're missing this. We're missing that. Like he does all that, which I'm very, very thankful for him and his work.
For sure. So then what does that mix prep process look like for you then? Like, is there, aside from obviously like loading things in, I don't know if you have a template or whatever, but is he kind of setting kind of a rough mix for you, or like what?
So not so much. He's actually just more doing just the whole template thing, getting that in there. And then he sets up the session for stems. So afterwards, so it's all folder based. So he knows when the song's done, he goes in there The folders are all there. Those are all the stems. He prints them all out. He does that. So like, not so much level stuff at all. It's more about just folders and organization, because when I can see there's the drums, that's where it's hitting, I can quickly go in and just make my adjustments. So as far as like that all goes. So it's more about just everything else that goes into the whole mix prep, you know.
It's kind of like preparing for the deliverables that have to go out at the end.
Correct. Yep. So he's doing that all even beforehand. Yeah. So all those folders are all just going to be stems at the end. Yeah.
And I think that makes a lot of sense, because I think some people forget about that, and then afterwards they're trying to make stems out of something that wasn't set up a certain way, and then, you know, maybe things are being missed in the routing and all that kind of stuff. So it's smart to have it all ready to go from the beginning.
And the only problem that we run into is when I bring in another dive bomb or like a cymbal swell, and I put it in the wrong spot, then it messes them all up. And I'll do that a lot. I'll always bring in like if I'm hearing something that needs to go in the mix, I'm just going to do it and then get yelled at later for it, you know? And I'm always pretty much like, you know, I know the producer usually who I'm working with, and it's like, if I have free reign to do something, I'm just going to do it and then turn it off. And then I always say, hey, if you hate this, let me know. I'm just going to take it out. Not a big deal. I don't care. I'm just going to do what my gut says first and then go from there, you know?
Absolutely. Well, another thing I wanted to ask about with regards to your productions is, like, I think you do a great job of getting the low end of your tracks like to feel really big and full, but without it sounding muddy. So I'm curious to know about like your approach to handling low end in your mixes, and like, you know, how do you go about getting them to sound so full, but yeah, eliminating the mud?
Kickstart, is that what's called? Kickstart 2, that plugin. Do you have that?
I don't think I've heard of that one.
So it's a sidechain thing that I'm doing. Okay. That helps a ton. I'm just doing that with the sub bass and the bass guitar. Obviously, everyone does that, but that's that. And then I mean the whole ozone exciter thing helps a ton. Like, you know, it depends if I have like what's going on in the song. Like if there's a sub and a bass guitar, usually I'll have to like I'll make the sub have more harmonics going on, so I can actually hear what's going on and still have the super low stuff. But I got to, you know, make some harmonics happen to make it cut through more of, like, you know, on like computers and phones and that kind of thing. I just use my ears, and I'm just going to go in, like, listen, there's this, you know, what's going on? Is a sub too loud? I just try to use my ears for the most part, not overthink it. And that's probably gotten me into some bad spots at some point, but I just don't overthink things in general, honestly. And I just kind of make the moves, and then typically I'll mix a song one day, not send it out that same day. I'll come back the next morning, fresh ears, listen to it, tweak it, and then I'll send it out, you know, which is probably a good tip for anybody who is doing that. Because at the end of an 8-9 hour day, you're like, wait, what am I hearing right now? You know, so.
It's funny. Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because I do think that sometimes that can be a blessing or a curse when you come back the next day. Because like the next day, you're gonna feel completely different. And for some people, I know for myself, if like I'm gonna be in a different headspace day 2 than day 1, and I feel like if I could just get a mix done and call it done in day 1, like I've fulfilled that whole vision that I had in my mind that day. Whereas like the next day, I might come back and start second guessing things. So it is interesting to hear different approaches to it, for sure.
Totally. And also, like, for a good tip for anybody, you know, mixing full, like, you know, a lot of hours per day is just to get up and take a 10-minute walk. Because to me, that I've been doing that recently, and it's like, it's huge, because you sit right back down and you hit play from where you left off. And just, it's an eye-opening thing. It's like, wait, oh, this is happening, that's happening. It's just I don't know. I will sit in that chair for literally, you know, 3 hours at a time, and it's bad. So I'm every like hour now, I'm up and doing something, you know. I always kind of feel like I'm like under the gun lately, like just with stuff happening and like making people happy, like trying to get it done on time and have it be great. It's just like, sometimes it gets to you, but I feel like getting up and having a quick walk is always super helpful.
Yeah, I think that like, it really comes down to like how fast you are with your process and like how fast you mix, and like having that perspective, right? Because if you're the type of person that takes a long time to mix, not necessarily anything wrong with that, but it's just like you're gonna lose your perspective. You're gonna have heard the song a million times. Your objectivity just goes out, And so you need to break it up and have those little walks or whatever it is to break it up so that you can come back with fresh ears and approach it from like, okay, now I know what I got to clean up. And I think it's really important to take those breaks, or to like, it's either you got to work real fast and have your system so dialed in that you can like get something done in a couple hours, which for most people is very difficult to do. Or you just have to plan, like make breaks or find ways to recalibrate your ears throughout the process.
Yeah.
So then on that note, like how long does it typically take you to finish a mix? Especially now that you've talked about how you kind of have this, like you have your assistant, and you've seen that production style, that production line kind of style of production. So how long does it typically take you?
Yes, that's a good point. And that was my whole part. When I got into just mixing, that was still my mindset. Like, how can I make this, what's the, how can I make this faster? What do I need to do? Do I need another guy to do this? So that whole thing was part of my whole, that still stemmed from all those guys and their work ethic of like how I can do more songs per month, and so bringing in Steven was a huge help. So typically now, anywhere from, I would say on average 2 to 7 hours per song. So sometimes for me, with my 8 to 9 hour ish work day that I have, I'm not getting that done because I'm doing tweaks on 3 other songs. I'm on a phone call with this guy. I'm doing this. So it's kind of like juggling all of those things. I feel like I'm typically a song a day on average, give or take, but that's kind of what I've been doing. So yeah, it's a matter of just like juggling everyone's schedule, and when they want to call on the phone and talk about something, or if they want to do a live stream, that we do that all the time. So it's just all that stuff happens during the course of a day, and so I'm always planning on, okay, I got a song, I'm starting at 8:00 today, I'm gonna have it done by 3. It never happens. There's always something that's going on,
It's so hard to time block sometimes.
So hard.
Yeah. So then for you, how do you know when you're ultimately done with a mix then?
Good question. I don't really, I feel like I just get to a point where I'll sit back and just listen quietly like the whole way through. And if I feel like it's 95% there, I will just send it out, because the client and the producer will just basically say, "Oh yeah, let's do that, and we'll be done." That's kind of where it comes to. I rarely feel like I'm like, this is sad to say, I rarely feel I'm like, man, this is 100%. Sometimes I do, but like it's rare, and I'm like, sometimes it'll just come together. It'll be great, and like this song is like done, and I'll send it out. But usually it's like, man, I'm 95% there. Where it's close. I've already spent 7 hours on this. I think we just got to get it out to them. And I know there's gonna be notes anyway, so let's just get it out, and I can move on to the next song while I wait for them to give me notes. And it's like, that seems to work fine. Like no one thinks it's like 95%. They think it's great, whatever, so, or, good enough, I should say,
Totally. Yeah. It's you kind of have to have a very defined process to know, okay, like this is where I can call it quits and send it off and see where it's at. Like you need to have that kind of like that cutoff in your process somewhere to know, okay, this is fine. I think it's close. Let's see what they think. Because totally. your vision of like it being 100% perfect could be totally different than the artist too. So there's always that thing where like, if you spend like an extra 5 hours trying to tweak those last 2%, and then they're like, ooh, you totally missed the mark.
Yep, totally. Or even if it's like 20 or an hour more, that I wanted to take that extra mile. It's just like, it's just a small thing. It's like, they're not going to know or care, so yeah.
Absolutely. So then ultimately at the end of the day, like what ultimately makes a great sounding mix in your mind?
Man, to me, a lot of it comes down, the production has to be great, but excitement and a cool song. And I think the song is more important than the mix, because you can have, you've said this before. I think I've heard this before on your podcast, or I've heard it multiple times, but like the song could be great and the mix can be mediocre, and it still could be it could be a huge song. So it's about finding the cool factor in the song. If it's a instrument, or if it's the whatever it is, making that thing cool, making to me, even like when a production comes to me and there's a cool down third chorus that happens, and there's a stop that happens, or whatever it might be, accentuating that thing too to make it even, go bigger and go harder, and creating moments. So I will, like, if something isn't completely like right with me with the production, I'll mute something or do whatever it is to make that impact better or harder. I'll just do it. And then, of course I always say, hey, if you don't hate it, let me know. But I'll do that kind of stuff too. So it's all about just excitement and just bringing out the whatever emotion you can get. And yeah, I don't know. That's kind of it for me,
Yeah, it makes sense to me. Dude, I think that's a perfect spot to wrap up. This has been great. I love learning more about your process and how you approach your mixes and your mindset behind even just like running your studio and how your efficiencies and all that kind of stuff. I think it's really interesting and definitely a lot of stuff for people to take from this episode. So thank you for that. If people want to learn more about you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Instagram, Nick Radovanovic is my Instagram. Facebook, you can find me there. NickRad.com is my website. You can contact me through that thing. Website's a little bit outdated, so don't judge me on that, but you can contact me through that too, via email. So, and if you want Nick Rad, Nick@NickRad.com is my email if anyone wants to hit me up.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks again for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Mike. I appreciate this.
Awesome. So that was my interview with Nick Rad, and there was just so much in that conversation that I felt like I could totally relate to in my own journey throughout production and music as well. And I thought it was really cool to talk about kind of that journey of him being the musician, getting into production. And that's definitely where I saw a lot of similarities in my own story. But where I thought it was really interesting was hearing him talk about getting to work with some of those bigger producers and how they had that assembly line approach to their production. Because that's something that I think a lot of people, especially early on, you're not even thinking about that, right? You're just thinking, I have to take on everything and it's just going to all be me. And you work yourself to the bone trying to do everything. But I think getting a glimpse into what it looks like to work with those top tier producers and to see that they've created these efficiencies as far as building a team and hiring people to help with editing and mix prep and all that kind of stuff, it really shows you how you have to also be thinking ahead. You have to be thinking about, like, what can I do to work smarter, not harder, and to maximize your time, maximize your income, all that kind of stuff. And it really just does take that forward-thinking approach of how can I create these efficiencies? Who can I get to help? And what can I do to make this experience more enjoyable? I know that when you're just getting started, it feels like you need to do everything, but you really don't. I also thought it was fun to learn more about his approach to mixing vocals and how he likes to audition different vocal chains. I think that that's important because so many people get stuck in their habits. They use the same tools all the time. They maybe don't even mess with their tools. They just say, like, this is my setting and that's it. And they just have a narrow-minded treatment of all of the instruments that they work on. With Nick's approach, it gives him the flexibility to have two different styles of vocals right off the bat, to calibrate his ears to say, this one sounds better, I'm going to lean more into this, and then he tweaks accordingly. I think sometimes having those different perspectives can be refreshing and give us a sense of creativity and allow us to ultimately serve our songs better too. So yeah, I thought it was really interesting to dig into his vocal process too. So yeah, I really enjoyed that episode. I hope that you did as well. If you did, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast. That way you're notified about all new episodes as they go live each and every Wednesday morning. And if you listen to this episode and you're thinking, I don't know what I'm doing with my mixes, I don't know how to mix properly, let alone make it an efficient system where I can mix fast and, feel like I'm saving that time and having the confidence that I'm going to get good results. If that sounds like you and you would like some help, that is exactly what I'd love to help you out with inside of my coaching program, Amplitude. In that program, I work one-on-one with my students to help give you that beginning to end process that is repeatable, and you can implement that into every production that you work on so that you can get pro results in less time, feel more confident, and feel like you know exactly what you're doing and you're getting the sounds that you hear in your head to come out of your speakers. So if you want one-on-one help with your music, make sure to visit MasterYourMix.com/amplitude, and you can find out all the details about my coaching program there. And then I'd love to hop on a call with you. I'd love to learn more about you and your music, what's working for you, what's not working for you, to see if I can truly help you. And if it does seem like I could help you and you'd be a good fit, then I'd love to invite you into the program, because I know that I only work with people who I truly believe I can help. And if you're in that program, we're going to help you make massive results, cut down your speed, and get you feeling way more confident and proud of the work you're making. So once again, if you're interested in learning more about that program, make sure to check out masteryourmix.com/amplitude, and you can find out all the details there. And then last but not least, I want to give a special shout out to our podcast sponsor, Samply. Samply is awesome. And speaking of efficiencies, Samply is a company that has helped save me a ton of time when it comes to mix revisions. So definitely make sure to check them out online at samply.app. And with that said, we've reached the end of this episode. Thank you so much for sticking around, and I can't wait to chat with you in the next one. We'll talk soon. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. Please make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app and leave a review. If you have any questions or comments for the podcast, send an email to questions@masteryourmix.com. And for more information on how to create pro recordings from your home studio, visit masteryourmix.com.